Welcome to the TRXL podcast. I'm Evan TRXL, and in this episode, I welcome Patrick Chopson and Eric Cesal. Patrick is the co-founder of Cove, aka Cove Tool, and one of the drivers behind their newly formed AI-powered architecture practice. Eric is an architect, post-disaster expert, former executive director at Architecture for Humanity, and special program instructor at Harvard. He's also a sharp observer of the evolving relationship between technology and architectural practice. His Substack, called Life as a Disaster, is worth subscribing to, and I've included a link to it in the show notes for this episode. This episode explores what it means to build an AI-first architecture firm, not by layering AI on top of outdated processes, but by starting from scratch. Eric introduces the AI-first mindset, borrowing a page from the journalism industry's shift to digital-first thinking, and challenges us to stop asking how AI can fit into traditional workflows. Instead, what happens when we reimagine the entire system from first principles? Patrick, meanwhile, has already made the leap. He shares how Cove is now delivering design services with a hybrid team of architects and software engineers, building bespoke AI tools, sometimes just for a single project. What they've created goes beyond their sustainability consulting service. It's a new kind of architecture firm, one that is operationally different, legally responsible, of course, and focused on giving experienced architects more time to design while maintaining higher coordination and quality standards. We also dig into the critical mismatch between architectural education and real-world demands in an AI-driven practice, why large multi-office firms may be structurally at a disadvantage during this technological shift, how AI might elevate senior architects while challenging the traditional learning curve of junior staff, and why building trust in the output, not just the speed, of these tools is essential to firm adoption. A key theme from this conversation, which connects to many of the other episodes, is the power of rethinking practice models from the ground up. An AI-first approach forces us to confront everything we've inherited, from phase structures to compensation models, and ask, if we started today with today's tools and knowledge, how would we design a practice that serves both clients and architects better? There's an extensive amount of additional information in the show notes, as usual, so be sure to check those out. You can find them directly in your podcast app if you're a paid supporter of TRXL Plus, and if you're a free member, you can find them at the website, which is trxl.co. Please consider becoming a paid supporter if you aren't one already. If you are, thank you so much. It makes a tangible difference for the sustainability of this podcast. So now, without further ado, I bring you my conversation with Patrick Chopson and Eric Cesal. Welcome back to the podcast. This episode is going to feature two brand new guests. And Eric, we just actually got to meet in person at a recent event in San Francisco, which was fantastic. And I think I told you when I met you originally just on the phone that I had been gifted one of your books in the past, which was Down Detour Road, which is searching for meaning, I think, is kind of one of the things that I talked about with you regarding like this. maybe architects are always kind of dealing with an existential crisis on some level, right? I mean, and we'll be talking about that today, actually, but that was kind of my intro to you a few years ago that a friend gifted me that book. So Eric, welcome to the show, and Patrick, welcome to the show. Eric, if you want to just kind of kick us off and kind of give us an idea of where you've been before we get into the actual topic today.
First of all, my main focus is not and has never been on technology per se. My background is in the humanitarian sector. I train as an architect and as a construction manager. I have degrees in both as well as an MBA. So after 5 years of commercial practice, I was back in graduate school and started volunteering on the Katrina reconstruction. And that kicked off a career in post-disaster recovery that went global, leading the global disaster studio for Architecture for Humanity. And in 2015, I pivoted to more of a teaching and advocacy role, which included having my own podcast for a while, Social Design Insights, and teaching at first at WashU, then at Berkeley, and now currently at Harvard. And I think the roots of this discussion started a couple of years ago when I started writing and lecturing on AI through the lens of disaster, not AI doomerism, but, this is a large impact event. And, is architecture as a profession going to be resilient towards it? And are we having the right preparations and reactions for what's coming?
I want to talk about fairly recent article that you wrote. Before we jump into that, Patrick, welcome to the podcast. Great to have you. I know we've talked before just on a regular call and talked about kind of what you guys were up to with Cove. And since then, made a pivot, speaking of pivots that Eric just mentioned, which we'll talk about today. But Patrick, welcome to the podcast. And maybe you can kind of give us a little bit of background on your circuitous route through this industry.
Super happy to be here. One of the things that is interesting is we've raised $36.5 million to date in venture funding against trying to find ways to bring buildings carbon lower. That's kind of like the whole objective. How we do that, we've tried many different things. We tried working with manufacturers. We've tried working with architects to varying degrees of success with our analysis tool that we've had for many years. But then over time, we found out that most architects want to answer. Some of them will learn, but many want to just have someone tell them what their carbon is in their building, or the energy use or daylight or so on and so forth. So we actually started a consulting practice, which then recently we've actually also expanded that to include architectural services as well. So we're one of the first AI powered architecture firms, and we've had a lot of success thus far with a lot of developers. So excited to keep that rolling.
Nice. All right. Well, Eric, let's jump into kind of where the idea for this conversation started, which was with an article that you wrote. And you said you don't really focus on the AI kind of doomerism, but you do include images of the Terminator in your graphics.
Yeah, I do.
So maybe you can kind of kick us off about what it means to kind of rethink practice when we talk about new tools kind of, I don't want to say taking over, but infiltrating, but also kind of change. There's a new mindset that is potentially required here. And I'm curious kind of your thoughts when you're about the article that you wrote about being an AI first practice.
Yeah. Well, first of all, the Terminator thing is meant to be diffusing humor.
Yeah.
So I'm not sure.
It's not a menacing graphic. I didn't mean to paint that picture. It's very cartoonish. Here's the Terminator. The Terminator has a speech bubble, and so anyway, we'll put
or whatever. Yeah.
We'll put a link to it in the show notes
Okay.
so people can read it.
No, the AI first article was the culmination of several years of thinking and arose out of a metaphor of digital first, which journalism went through in the 90s. And, with the emergence of the internet, there was this tension, are we going to be print first or digital first? Yeah. So if you're print first, you already know what you're doing, and then you just have to stand up a website and put the articles on there. But being digital first offers some advantages. And if we're going to be digital first, then a lot of those practices that had been in place, that had been sacred for the last 100 years, probably didn't make a lot of sense, as well as a lot of the physical infrastructure. So, I started thinking through that a couple of years ago. An AI first architecture firm, we started off with a blank slate and said, the one objective is to deliver designs for buildings that want to get made. How would you do it? Not how would you take AI and apply it to the processes that we know, the phases that we know, the, customs and habits. Nobody knows like why the hell we do this the way that we do, but that's the way I was taught. And that's the way my mentor was taught by his mentor and this sort of thing. Knowing all the technology that we have today, and the technology that we can be fairly confident is coming in the next few years, how would you organize a practice? And it's some of it probably seems a little far-fetched, but that's the point. Is that we're buried in a lot of practices that got their start in an era of paper, and then we kind of layer digital technology and computers onto those practices, and now we're going to layer AI on top of that. And I think different things emerge when you really ask that question, like, okay, scrap everything except the starting point, the end point, and let's see how we get there. And I'll offer one example and then I'll give up the mic. I mean, one of it is is phasing, right? We have these very strict phases of schematic design, design development, construction documents, etc. And my hypothesis was that, you could easily embody the interests, and maybe even the personality of a client in some sort of large language models. There's researchers doing that at Stanford now, and I'm sure the CIA did it, 5 years ago. Um, and then, have the client as a co-pilot on the design process, where you could access that person for questions when they were actually necessary, as opposed to, at some pre-scheduled interval or something like that. And you could also block them out, right? When you just need to work, you can say, all right, you go off to the side, I'm pressing mute. This is my design time. I'm going to figure it out. So, I mean, I think we all should be engaged in those sort of speculations at the moment, because they're going to be here before we know it, I think.
I think there's a lot of speculating and a lot of pontificating. I mean, you're talking about kind of a thought experiment, right? And there's value in that, but I think a lot of people get stuck at that part too. And so I think this is where it gets interesting, because Patrick's here and talking about what you're up to with Cove. It's like, oh, you went beyond the pontification, and you're out there and you're talking about what you're doing. You're not doing it even in secret. You're kind of semi, I assume, kind of doing it in public, not 100%, but maybe this podcast gets this more behind the scenes about what you're actually up to. But to actually like pull the trigger and say, we are going to move forward with a different model. And I don't know what that means. I just assume it's different, right? So, I mean, Patrick, give us an idea of, I mean, because Eric, you talked about like we can see, we're fairly certain about what's coming. I don't know if that's actually the case. I think a lot of times this is also what's holding architects back, which is like, what do you mean it's fairly certain? Like this stuff is still changing so rapidly. What if we tie ourselves to this thing and then the rug gets pulled out from underneath us, right? And maybe the nimbleness of a startup has a little bit more ability to kind of navigate that. Anyway, I want to throw this to you, Patrick, and kind of get your thoughts on based on what Eric is talking about, how you decided to actually move forward in this space.
Yeah. Yeah. So I think like a lot of, as you mentioned, a lot of folks were saying over the last couple of years, oh, this is coming. Someday it'll be here. Many firms have banned AI, but you have to think about why did large firms and many other firms ban the use of AI? It's because they couldn't validate the chain of command of thought that runs through an idea. So like you couldn't actually maintain what they call responsible control. So without responsible control, you can't use AI, because you legally have to understand as an architect, like where did I get the answer from? Have I like made sure that I've exercised the standard of care? So for the most part, up until maybe about 6 or 7 months ago, it was very hard to kind of like figure that out. And so once we had solved that internally here at Cove with some of the new tech that had come out from different people like Claude, OpenAI, different ones, then we were able to actually start building tools around that where you can maintain and understand how you get from one answer to like another answer and map that out. And so that's like really important. So that was the first thing that was enabling that allowed us to move forward. And the second thing we saw that really was a big game changer was understanding interpretation of intent by AI systems has dramatically improved over the last like 6 to 8 months. And so once that also, those two things, interpretation of intent, is being able to maintain responsible control, now you can actually build an AI-powered architecture firm. And then, of course, we have years and years of building tech for the AEC industry at our back. So we actually understand how to build applications, and we have a full software team of 10 people. But now those 10 software engineers collaborate with the architects. And as we're doing specific projects, we can not just build an application that is general purpose. We can build applications that are for single use. Like for a specific project, we can actually build an AI application that solves a very specific problem, throw that piece of software out, and then maybe never use it again, because there's not as much of a problem with that. And we're also building like some really cool internal tools that allow us to produce drawings and things like that. And those ones are how we kind of gather a lot of information up front and be able to actually do the work of architecture a lot more smoothly with less revisions. and get things done on time, which turns out to be the thing that most developers right now are really hurting for, is a on-time delivery.
Does that and is that really like because there's just less and less time available to do these kinds of things? Is
Mm,
because it's like the tool stack that people have and their understanding of their current capabilities. Like we know pretty much how long it takes to do a thing,
mm.
but that time frame is getting squeezed. And like new tools do allow efficiencies to happen, maybe less steps. It's not all about efficiency. I would assume like there's got to be design differentiation to make projects also successful. And so I'm just curious from your point of view, like have you just accepted that as like, yeah, we're going to have less time to do it. The quality still needs to, the bar needs to be way up
Mm.
here. How are we going to get from here to there? And it's by employing thinking and tools like
I
this.
guess the most important thing, though, is when a developer is hiring an architect, if you really break down the business problem that they're trying to solve, is they need someone to assume risk. And so from their
Hmm.
perspective, doing it faster, which every architect is afraid of when it comes to AI, is not really what they want. They want to pay for someone to review the project to come up with the best and highest use of their design. And, as architects, we sometimes, because of all the things we have to do, we don't have time to make sure that we explore
Hmm.
multiple alternatives. The design cycle time is just not enough.
Hmm.
You saw people like big architects, they use Grasshopper and things like that to improve their cycle times. And that's kind of like how they achieve some success with more resolved, looking designs, back over the last few years. But that's like still only a 2x or 3x improvement in speed of iteration. So I think like that's
Hmm.
where, as architects, we need to focus on. The developer does not want us to do it too fast. What they want is they just want to get it done, and they want to have it be coordinated, because we're seeing many older principals are retiring now, and the knowledge they have around coordination is not necessarily getting passed on quite as well. And so we see more and more uncoordinated drawings delivered late. And that's the big pain point for most developers. So that's why,
There's more and more drawings
yeah,
too.
there's more drawings
Like
too. Yeah.
there's a lot more
Yeah.
drawings. I'm curious just if you guys have seen this newest graph. I've seen it circulating around a little bit, which is, like the old version was, here's design is kind of like this slow curve and the gently curving upward of it's like what you're doing over time. And AI kind of jumps up real quick in the beginning, but then there's a bunch of iteration because it gives you something pretty close, and then it's like, okay, now tweak, 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 tweak,
Mm.
tweak, 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 and it's like, okay, we end up at the same place at the same time as we used to. It's a different process to get there, but it sounds, Patrick, like what you're talking about is you've actually been able to kind of make the tools do what you want faster. Like you trust them sooner because of the kind of the work that you're doing. Does that sound about right? Or you
Yeah.
tell me.
I mean, if you build it yourself, you can definitely know how you got the answer. So
Interesting.
that's the most important thing. But giving us more time for design excellence, that's like what we're
Mm.
optimizing for in the processes that we have in house, is like, how do we get experienced, really good architects with really good design sense? How do we give them more time to do the thing that they do best, which is,
Where the value
yeah,
is.
that's where the value is at.
Yeah. Right. Eric, what do you think about what Patrick's kind of describing as a place to kind of kick this conversation off with as far as like implementing into practice?
Yeah, I mean, I think the implementation is great, and it's a terribly important discussion, right? Where is the value at, and what are people actually seeking when they hire the services of an architect? I think Patrick is spot on. The highest motivation of most of the developers that I know is risk. They want somebody to assume the risk of errors because those errors stack up. Um, I would challenge a little bit the idea that, if time is second, it's a very, very close second. When you take out a $50 million commercial loan, you're paying $250,000 a month in interest, on this project. So, if we have the ability to collapse the design process from 14 months to 14 weeks, I assume every developer would jump at that because it means the building gets done sooner and, the returns start coming in sooner, as long as it's at the specific level of quality. I think that brings with it problems in an industry that charges by the hour. And I think that's the fundamental problem that I've always been reacting to, is that architects have an idea about where their own value comes from. And I'm not convinced that that's synchronous with other people's ideas of where our value actually lies. And I think it's also not synchronous with the fee mechanisms that we have. You know, we claim that design is where our value lies, but the methods that we use to charge for our services are principally by the hour and as a percentage of construction costs, both of which are design agnostic. So, you know, I think AI and the sort of advances that Patrick and his team are achieving really brings into relief the historical problems that we all kind of knew about with architectural practice. And I hope that our methods of practice can evolve as quickly as Patrick is evolving the technology.
I have another wrinkle maybe to throw in here. And Patrick, I'd love to hear your thoughts on this, which is like, just using Eric's example of 14 months to 14 weeks, that to me sounds more valuable than, right? Like it sounds like that should actually cost more for an architect's fees. And so I'm curious, like how is this how are you seeing this work out in when it comes to practice, billing, all of those, timelines, milestones, those kinds of things?
Yeah, I would have thought that too when we first started. So we even did this with architects when we did consulting before, where we could do something in a day. And we thought that people would want to get that very detailed analysis in a day. But it turned out that it was too fast. And that if you did it so fast, people thought it wasn't valuable. So there is an element in the construction industry that people know how long things should take or they want them to take. And then if you fall too far outside of that range, then it calls into question the validity of your process and your accuracy of what you're doing and how high the quality is. So there is some people just want to make sure that proper time is being taken. So yeah, I could see it like for us, we've been able to do things about 40% faster, 60% faster in terms of making drawings. But if I go to sell an owner on that, they're like, the biggest risk is that my money that I've sunk into this project to acquire the land or to like secure this loan, if I lose that, my architect's fees are nothing in comparison to that. So it's like making sure that it's right, that's been vetted, that's been figured out. But also like in the beginning, when you're just doing site evaluations, if those things are incorrect and we can't actually build for the price that we think we are, and we're 20%, 40% off in the construction costs, then that's a bigger risk oftentimes to the developer. So like that they really want to know is like, is this accurate? And so if we're like, yeah, it's more accurate what we're doing, or it's higher quality, that is probably what most people are paying for. Now, obviously there'll always be someone who wants to do it quick, like a Amazon Web Services building 20,000, data centers, or like some kind of, people building warehouses. That could be a thing. But, so speed is of the essence for some building types. But for many projects, like what we're finding is that it's the $50 to $100 million projects where our services are most receptive. So that's going to be things like multifamily, garden style, or like mid-rise, or we got a couple high-rise projects we're working on. So it's like those types of projects where coordination can make or break the project are like really, really ones that we seem to be winning on a lot lately, which I think is not what I expected. I thought we'd do small projects first that had quick turnarounds. It's actually the bigger ones that have more coordination, where we're really kind of like winning the trust of those developers.
Interesting.
Yeah.
And if you can do drawings 40 to 60% faster, does that just mean then that you're spending more time on the quality level and the upfront? So you're yeah, so you're just like changing the way that the hours are kind of stacked, right?
Yeah.
So you actually are getting to put more time into design, like you talked about, and ensuring that the quality's there, where a lot of people are just underwater trying to keep up, and there's delivering an uncoordinated, quote unquote, set of drawings at the end. Obviously, architects reputations, their license, all kinds of things rely on this kind of thing. So I'm not just trying to say that architects are doing that, but I mean, things fall through the cracks. Like they definitely slip through the cracks. A lot of time, especially, in the last, let's just say 10 years ago, right? You would, in public work for schools, you could submit a set of drawings, and then because you knew it sat in the bin for 6 to 9 months before it was going to get reviewed, knowing it's half baked, and then go slip in sheets before, that things have been catching up to that. Like that isn't really a thing anymore, I don't think. But these are examples of how this has worked in the past, and now you're saying like you're actually getting to spend more time on the stuff that matters in the process because of those efficiencies that you've figured out.
And, think about too, like there's a lot of studies I'm sure that you guys have probably seen as well, and other viewers, but like, I don't know if you guys realize this, but like they're saying like when study after study, people with lots of experience can achieve up to a 10x improvement in using AI of some type that's well fitted to their industry. But someone with no experience achieves a negative increase in productivity. So I can see that as I train people on our team, that we have to invest a lot in training people who are junior on how to use the tool. Someone who's older, more experienced, like for example, Ed Aikens, AIA that's on our team, he picked up AI-driven workflows in a few days as soon as we started using it, producing gorgeous drawings, beautiful images, but everything was like, looked a lot like what I would expect to see from him if he'd spent several weeks, but he was like doing it in just a couple of days. And so like, then he's spending his time designing because he understands what he's looking for. And so like, that is like the beauty, and also the hard part is like, you have to invest much more in people if you want AI to be successful in your business.
Let's take a short break from the conversation to tell you about something that I think is pretty great and you might be interested in it. And that is my exclusive newsletter available only to paid members of TRXL Plus that I call Leadership Edge. If you're looking to stay ahead of the curve in architecture and technology, Leadership Edge delivers insights that you won't find anywhere else. Why? Well, because they are my deep dives into the podcast conversations, just like the one that you're listening to in this episode, to give you an edge on the industry. Each edition of the newsletter provides key insights for forward-thinking leaders seeking innovation in AEC who are short on time, offering the context of each conversation without the need to listen to the full episode. I've actually designed them, though, to keep you updated, spark your interest, and encourage you to tune into the full episodes if those ideas resonate. And the best part is that they are packed with actionable takeaways to help you navigate the future of practice. By becoming a paid supporter, you get Leadership Edge delivered right to your inbox, and it's a direct way to support my podcast while getting exclusive, valuable content to sharpen your leadership mindset. You can join today at trxl.co and start receiving my Leadership Edge newsletters. Just click the subscribe button either in the upper right-hand corner or at the bottom of the page, or you can visit the link that I put in the show notes. Thanks. Now back to the conversation. I knew there was going to be a people aspect here because this is the thing, the fear. There's obviously a lot of fear in these tools, but also just in the unknown, right? So I'm curious, Eric, what you think about this people side of the conversation now.
Yeah, where to start? No, I mean, it's got me concerned. Patrick, I hear a lot of the same things, and, I experience them in my own work with AI. When I ask Claude a question and, it's a complicated question, the answer comes back in less than a second. I'm like, nah, that can't be right. Like do something else. But a question,
just fake it for me. That's what you just if
bullshit.
It did take a little longer, would I trust it more? That's an interesting aspect to this.
Well, yeah. I mean, when they released the microwave, there was a lot of suspicion around it because, people could not get their heads around the idea that food was being cooked in so short amount of time. And for all of human history, eating uncooked food was, occasionally fatal. So people had a lot of concerns about it. And, gradually people acclimated to the idea that like, yeah, I can cook my dinner in 2 minutes or 3 minutes in the microwave or something like that.
Now we rely on it.
Yeah. Now it's like absolutely necessary. But that's a good point too, because, the sort of hesitancy, Patrick, that you were describing, I wonder how long that sticks around and how long it takes for the entire AEC value chain to acclimate. Um, I deeply respect the fact that, you soak up that extra time with more design to, bring the work to a higher level of quality. I also know that there are architects who aren't going to do that
Yeah.
once they get, hands on the tools, and they're going to, try and outbid everybody in the room and say, look, I can get it done in 47 minutes. Just like, give me the job.
Yeah.
And like, here's
Race
your
to the
drawing
bottom.
set.
Yeah.
So, I mean, I think that's where, I get concerned about the people aspect, is that architects have this notorious history of devaluing their own services and their own worth. And I think it's a profession-wide project to figure out how, as these technological changes are taking place, we manage to preserve or enhance the value as perceived on the client side.
And that's where, like, in our opinion, obviously, because this is a protected profession because we got the stamp, it really lends itself, unlike many other industries, the AI innovation will have to be done by architects themselves because of like the legal liability of the stamp itself. So like for myself as a licensed professional that stamps a lot of the drawings here, I have to be, and also the person producing the software, like I've coded my own ADA bathroom generator that's a part of the whole process, right? Like I want to know exactly what assumptions we made, how do we make them, go through with the team that's making it, check it line by line, make sure that makes things that are plausible and that meet code. But like, you're right. Like there'll be a time when that won't be the case, that there'll be less careful people building things. But I think it's really incumbent upon those who are building the tools like us and others to like have a broader conversation with the AEC, especially the A part of the community, and start educating people, start collaborating, sharing things like what we're doing here, the ideas back and forth, such that we can make sure that the systems we are designing are biased towards sustainability. Like, for example, we're analyzing everything from a carbon perspective in the back end. Whether or not it tells that to the owner or we actually highlight that, maybe not a good idea these days, but but like we're actually checking it, so that we can ensure that our buildings are by default the lowest carbon we can achieve. But that's like kind of my dream has always been, how do I create that maximum impact? I've come to see that it's maybe affecting the architecture is maybe a faster way to do it. So I don't know. But there's a lot of like, we have to be engaging with the AIA, different folks. I know AI has kind of been on a rocky period recently in terms of, how to get the profession to work better together. But I think like if we do all work better together, we can come through this whole AI transition with a philosophy and rules and things that make sense. I think I would advocate for an AI code of conduct from the AIA, so everyone has a standard.
Absolutely. Yeah.
I want to throw this out now because, and it hasn't come up on this show yet, but did you guys see the survey that AIA published regarding adoption of AI tools just amongst existing firms? And it was put out there as kind of like a report, but it was just based on survey results. And that's the survey. I mean, I just maybe Patrick, from your point of view, what did you think about that survey? Because it was really mixed, right? It was like, okay, of course this is going to be what an AIA survey results look like. It's like some architects are just saying we're just watching from the sidelines, and other ones are like, yeah, we're going. Okay, you just painted a picture of nothingness to me. I mean, it's just like that is such an obvious outcome of a quote unquote survey, but the way that they presented it was like, here are the facts of the industry. And I felt like it was actually like, I asked, who's the audience of this survey? Is it architects? Because I mean, it's a public facing article that they put out there. And I'm thinking, well, if future clients read this, it's kind of damning of the industry. Like our architects aren't adopting the latest, greatest tools. Everybody's adopting these tools. Why wouldn't architects? And I mean, there's a lot of nuance in there, right? When it comes to risk and standard of care and control of the documents and all those things that the public doesn't know about, but I kind of, they don't care about that stuff either, right? So I'm just curious from your point of view, what you thought of that survey, and because I think it is kind of a state of the industry, but at the same time, there's going to be a lot of AI first firms like you who would never, not necessarily you, but they wouldn't even talk about their use of AI because it's They want to keep it a secret. Like a lot of firms have always wanted to keep their technologies and their special sauce and special podcast air quotes a secret.
Yeah, I don't know. I don't. I just have seen having tried to sell technology to architects for years and years that architects don't adopt new technology easily. We all know this.
Yeah.
So
Yep.
so I don't think
Lived it.
I don't think that it'll be very quick that most firms adopt AI, to be honest. Like they'll need to see some other people do it. It's kind of like the whole penguin
Yep.
analogy when you see the penguins that get close to the edge in the South Pole, and then there's like the sea lions and the orcas down there swimming around. They get closer and closer until one penguin falls off, and then they all look down. They say like, "Well, did he die?" And if he doesn't, then they all
I think
jump.
if you look closely, there was one right behind it that just kind of gave it a quick.
Yeah.
So that's I think how we'll see it. We've seen that like from CAD to BIM, there was like a 20-year adoption cycle, and I think like BIM, if I'm not mistaken, was 10 or 15 years, and then like probably we'll see a halving again of that to maybe 5 to 7 years. You'll see, I think most firms using AI, but like initially the first movers will have, like us and others will have like the time to actually understand what it is we're working with and really perfect that process, potentially ahead of other things. And then, of course, once we perfect it, I'm sure we'll end up sharing that with others. But our thesis is that most people don't want to try something new when something else is
Yeah,
working.
right. Right. Eric, did you see that survey that I'm talking about? I'll put a link to it in the show notes for the listeners. But I thought it, again, like it's just to me, it was a nothing burger of a report.
Yeah. I didn't actually see it, but you told me about it at the
Oh,
conference
that's right.
when we saw each other. And I assume it's like every other AI survey in architecture that I've seen from Riva or Architizer or whatever. And yeah, you have those striations of, the people who don't want to deal with it at all, which I agree with you, Evan, is hazard in terms of like how we face the public. And then at the opposite end, there's the ones who are, quote, podcast air quotes, is that what you call it?
Yeah.
Using AI, but what they mean by that is, ChatGPT to make an occasional query and Midjourney to make thousands of, renderings that nobody needs or wants. So yeah, I mean, I think that we need that statement of AI governance that Patrick was talking about, and we need to be conscientious about how architects are perceived as using AI in front of the client-facing public.
I want to shift gears a little bit and talk about students and kind of the next generation. Eric, I'm curious, does this come up in what you're teaching at Harvard?
No, but that's
This is a
probably
separate thing.
yeah, no, I mean, I teach in the global development program and I teach
Okay.
post-professional students. So I'm not, um, I'm not presently teaching design studio or anything like that, although I have. Um, I see it coming up in my classroom regardless. And I'll
Mm.
tell you the way that it comes up in my classroom. And I think that, the analog's perfectly there. I always tell my students that they should use AI, and that, AI catches are not sophisticated enough to catch them. And I can't always tell either, but they probably shouldn't use AI because it's normative. So in my class, I teach on community-based approaches to disaster resilience, and we're seeking innovation. We're acknowledging that our existing methods for keeping our community safe aren't adequate. So we're looking for better, newer, improved methods for doing that. And AI doesn't capture that very well, right? If you ask, ChatGPT or Claude out of the box, how do I keep my community safe for disaster? It's going to give you a pretty generic set of things to do. And I tell my students that's not adequate here. So I think that applies to all learning and all students across the board. AI makes it easy to give the easy response. And what we want for the future is, critical thinkers, innovators, entrepreneurs, people who are really going to push things forward. So I think in that sense, there should be serious alarm around how this is going to be used in the classroom, how we keep teaching innovation and design.
kind of setting a baseline and then going beyond, using it as that, and then going beyond that with your critical thinking skills, your design thinking skills.
If you understand it as a baseline, and I think, I've heard about models, Randy Deutsch at Champaign-Urbana, Phil Bernstein at Yale, that are really like teaching to it in that way and saying, look, here's AI, and then here's all the thinking that we're going to do on top of the AI. And I think that's the right way to teach it.
Yeah. Patrick, from your point of view, when it comes to tools, I mean, working in architectural practice, I would argue that there is an analogy here, which is like a lot of times the buildings end up looking like basically how the tool works is how you get to, yep, I can tell that's a Revit building or that's a SketchUp
Mm.
building, right? I'm again with the air quotes, but it is kind of that's a thing, right? For sure in practice, and because we are often limited by the tools and what you can make in the tools. So it obviously has to do with the skills of the operators and what they're capable of doing, what the tool's capable of doing, understanding how much time it actually takes to do workarounds in these tools to get them to do what you want, right? Often to terrible results, right? And wasting a lot of time. From your standpoint, like, has this really unlocked some additional freedoms because and again, like I have to put it out there, like the caveat here is you're software developers coming into this, and so not every architecture firm has that. I'm going to call it a luxury, right? But maybe you don't see it that way. But like you're coming at this from a different perspective, I think, than traditional practices where they're
Mm.
buying something off the shelf, like you're building versus buying in a lot of cases.
Yeah, no, that's interesting. I think like, I mean, there's a lot to unpack there. I guess like
Yeah,
when I
sorry.
when I think about like just kind of like what's on my mind is when I think about like the junior folks that work in a firm and how they are the ones who are going to get most impacted by the bias of the tool that you created because they won't know how to overcome it, or
Hmm.
they'll make something that seems technically complete, but but it's not beautiful, or
Hmm.
they'll
Hmm.
create a piece of writing where they won't be as good at writing or as good at like saying, here's what I'm trying to get. And then the AI, as it interprets that intent, doesn't like create something very interesting or compelling. Whereas like if I have a tool that generates images and it's trained on my hand drawing style, and then I have a junior person use that, then it makes things that are like what I would do. We've actually have like created different profiles for train image generation models for different principles so that the work looks like their work if they're having a junior person work with it. But I think like that is an interesting point though. It's like the bias of the tool. I've always been a tool bias person and studying that. And I think what I look at when I'm thinking about building an AI system is not train it necessarily like an image generator where it's trained on things from the past, but train it on how to think about a design problem. And so I tend to look back to like somebody like Nicholas Negroponte or maybe Christopher Alexander with pattern language. And I'm like, what is a design thinking methodology? And then how do we organize the information such that we can use that design thinking and keep everything in mind as we're like making a project. And then hopefully we create a model and a way of working that's biased towards an actual way of making things beautiful and interesting and compelling rather than trying to teach against a certain previous existing data set. So we can generate somewhat new things based on our human intent. So it's like, how do we achieve a tighter fit between a human intent and the machine's resolution of that intent? That's what I'm
Yeah.
always thinking about as we're building stuff.
I'm curious how do you actually extract that from people? Because I had a guest on recently and they talked about expertise and how experts don't even know what they know, right? They just know it and
Mm.
it comes out in different ways throughout the different parts of a project or in conversations or and so I'm curious because you talked about that idea of like keeping it all in mind, right? And that's hard for humans to do, to keep it all in mind. Like you may hear about a particular design constraint and then it's like you immediately forget about it and you design something and it's like, oh, it doesn't work because I forgot about that one rule. but the computer doesn't forget, and you can just continually add additional constraints so that they're always in mind, So I'm curious just how, first of all, how do you extract from
Mm.
individuals, and then do you put that into your models so that it is always in mind?
Yeah. So the closest analogy, I guess, of where this has already been figured out is in the software industry, where now you can code very large applications from scratch but you have to have like the standards that you're referencing. You have like the structure of the project that you're looking at. You have to have all these documents that help you vibe code, is what people call it nowadays. Instead
Yeah,
of,
you're the first person to bring up vibe coding on the podcast. I've been waiting for this to come up.
yeah. So, like, we actually went through this first with our software engineers. So, one of the things that was super valuable about this whole process is that we actually have an industry where they have been totally the game has changed. You can code now using 100% the whole project. So, when we took our software team, we we're like, guys, you're trying to use Copilot. You're still writing things line by line. Let's all work on learning how to code using a different way of coding. And one of the most valuable things that we have in our business is that our head of software engineering is an older guy who's been through 4 different ways of coding through his career. So starting from like, I think the 80s, 90s, to 2000, 2010s, he's been able to like see these different ways of doing what he's doing. So then when he and I sat down, like, how are we going to design an AI coding best practice? We actually had templates to pull on from the past of like how to do this. And so like changing how people thought about coding was very, very challenging. And so like,
Yeah.
but once they got over that hump, now they're all, building stuff at lightning speed, and they're building more things than they could ever build as a team of 10 before. So that's kind of like, I don't know. It's like we've already been through the process now with the software engineers. So I kind of have a template for how to like help architects get over the same hump. That's a very long answer. So I apologize, but
No, it was great. That was I know there's so much stuff in there that I want to explore, and I don't know if I can even recall it all. Talking about keeping things in mind, but that my first one that I want to talk about here is just this idea of you driving this process, because and that sounds very top down versus a grassroots kind of a thing, which I think is what most people are experiencing in firms today. It's like the technologists are the grassroots. They're the ones who are the doers. They're writing the scripts. They're checking out the new tools. They're experimenting. They're doing these things. But there's somebody at the top saying, no, we have to do it the way we've always done it. Right. And so, I mean, I know this is kind of a common trope, but at the same time, it's not untrue. I mean, a lot of people experience this. And so from you driving this process change, this, right, like that to me is a big difference.
yeah, I mean, that is the difference. Right now,
Yeah.
you kind of have the foxes are in the hen house to a certain extent when it comes to like innovation in the AEC. Like you have folks that aren't on the edge, but you do have a few firms where people are. I do think that a lot of your Gen X kind of principals are now assuming control of a lot of firms or millennials in some, limited cases, I guess. Those folks do have sometimes more of a technology bent to them. And so it's only possible to create an AI powered architecture firm if the leadership is aligned around like, we're doing this different and we're going to figure it out. And then everyone's going to feel uncomfortable for a while. But if you kind of like live in that state of discomfort, that's where you're going to find the innovation to actually do it. And then some things you just can't do with new tech, like hand drawing is still the fastest way to communicate with AI, I think, your design intent. So we have trash paper on every desk.
Nice. What can I ask you what generation you are, actually?
I am a geriatric millennial, I guess is what they call me.
I was the Gen Xers out there. I heard this recently, and it really threw me into like a perspective. Oh, okay, we are the last analog generation as Gen X's, and obviously we're not digital native, and so it was just kind of a new way to say that, right? It was like, oh, we're the last ones who grew up with analog as like the way it all started, and then many of us transitioned, but we're not digital natives. Eric, what do you think about this? I think it applies to education too, the thing that we're talking about here, but when it applies to education and the architecture profession. What do you think about this, like top down and versus grassroots, and like the position that many firms are stuck in, like literally
Yeah.
stuck in, because of the leadership?
Well, a few thoughts. First of all, shout out to Gen X, Evan. We got to stick together. So
Yeah.
I appreciate that. I always tell people like I was probably like the last class at school that was taught how to do hand lettering, and I still,
Hmm.
do it. I still write like that. A few thoughts, about the tool thing. A metaphor that I used in that article that you referenced in the beginning, is that when 19th century traders crossed a mountain range, they followed the path that was most hospitable to the poorest, right, and the lowest elevation, fewest rock slides, things like that. When 20th century engineers went through the mountain to dig a tunnel, they followed the path that was most favorable to geology. And nowadays, when we fly over the mountains, we ignore both and we just follow the path that is appropriate to the jet stream. So I think we need to be open to the idea that technology is speaking to us about the way in which it wants to be used. And as AI evolves, it won't always be the case of, us trying to make AI do this, but us listening and saying, look, by the nature of this technology, it suggests that we do something different. And maybe vibe coding is an example of that. Just kind of changing the paradigm about coding. The other thing is predictably a concern, right? Because, I'm the disaster guy. I wonder how these tools progress, and at what point they diffuse into the wider population. It was one of my first concerns about Midjourney, 2 years ago, 2.5 years ago. Architects were having a field day, and my thought was, hey, you know what? Everybody else can use Midjourney too. I wonder, as these tools evolve and they make the process of design more intuitive, more accessible, you don't have to spend years learning, Adobe Creative Suite or Revit. It's more of a conversational platform that you're working with. Does that open the door to additional predation and additional devaluation of architectural services? I agree with the prior comments that you really need to know what you're doing, at least at this point, to know when the AI is wrong and to apply that human judgment to the equation. But yeah, experts don't know what they don't know, and neither do regular people. So I think as a regular person, meaning like a client, it becomes very, very hard to delineate between something that is professional level quality and something that is 95% of professional level quality. So, I think the tool conversation is interesting, but I feel like we have to keep it in frame.
Yeah.
Hey everyone, let's take a quick break from the conversation to pay some bills around here. This episode of TRXL is brought to you by TRXL Plus members. That's right, my incredible paid supporter members are making this episode possible. Their direct support ensures that I can continue exploring the intersection of architecture, technology, and the future of design with the leading voices in our industry directly to you. So let's talk about why you might consider financially supporting the podcast too. By becoming a TRXL Plus supporter, you're not just helping sustain these conversations, you're also gaining exclusive benefits like ad-free episodes of the show and my Leadership Edge email newsletter, where I analyze episodes and deliver the insights and key takeaways right into your inbox. Your small contribution makes a huge impact. And if you've been enjoying TRXL and want to be part of the community that keeps it thriving, please consider joining today. Head on over to trxl.co and click the subscribe button either in the upper right-hand corner or at the bottom of the page, or you can visit the link that I've put into the show notes. Once again, my sincerest thanks to the TRXL Plus members who have made this episode of the podcast possible, even though they aren't even hearing this ad because theirs are ad-free. Now, let's get back to the conversation. I'm curious, Patrick, from your point of view, when it comes to that, like what he's talking about, it used to be that people would come with their own SketchUp model or their own, they would be drawing floor plans in Excel, for example, right? But it's happened, right? And so is this the new version of that? I think it is, right? But the other thing that we have to keep in mind is that the AI, and maybe this isn't the case, but it has been the case, is the AI doesn't understand space, and that's where architects the value comes in when it comes to these things and actually figuring that stuff out. And I will layer on top of that I think a lot of times being a quote unquote architect, a graduate of an architectural program, you still have many, many years until you understand those kinds of things in actually producing architecture and experiencing it and understanding the quality of those different things and how they affect the people that inhabit these spaces, right? Because it's not a 2D image on a screen, right? It's a spatial experience and it's a progression of spaces. It's function and adjacency and response to the environment and lighting and all of these layers of nuance that a lot of people just, here's what I want it to look like. It's like, well, there's a lot more to it than that. But give us kind of your perspective on that.
Yeah. I guess like as the AI becomes more aligned around your design intent of like what it is you're trying to do, I think that if you don't have good taste, it's going to align more closely to your poor taste than not, so it's like, if anything, as the tools become more sophisticated, they'll interpret what you're trying to do. And like, you'll still like, there's been a whole long thread on Twitter, or X, I guess now, where all these property developers, that's where they have their conversations. They're not on LinkedIn. They have a rip roaring time on X, and they always are chatting about deals and this and that. One of the things you see a lot of is people like, hey, I threw this image of this strip mall into my thing, and I got back a beautiful rendering, and it doesn't look beautiful what they made, but but from their perspective,
They think it is.
yeah. They think it looks pretty good, like. But what they were saying, which I think is the part that a lot of architects who might see that and freak out, is they were like, I just need to show the person who's going to give me money that this could look better. And I think like as architects, we should think about like, that's kind of like why they were hiring us to begin with, or doing feasibility studies. They just needed to secure that money. And then they spend the time to like getting the construction documents done. And no reasonable developer wants to do that work themselves. It's just not what they're looking to spend their time on. They want to find the next deal, and they want to analyze deals. And for them, everything's a spreadsheet anyway. The whole creative side is not something that they really are wanting to do. So I think like you'll probably just see, like, maybe you'll see people use it to like come up with a concept similar to like the Excel analogy of someone drawing a plan in Excel, and it'll still be not that great compared to what an architect will have access to in the future. The AI will have progressed on our side much far in advance of what a consumer will have access to, because we'll either be building it ourselves, or maybe someday a big company will figure something out, but I doubt.
An unnamed large company. Yeah.
That makes $1 billion a year. They'll buy something, that will do something. But like architects will always have access to tools and AI agents that will be far superior than what the regular person will have. And us, with all of our training, will be able to operate them more effectively, even if they are more sophisticated. I don't know. I remain optimistic that the profession will be, if anything, reinforced by good applications, but I fully acknowledge there'll be bad applications too.
Yeah, the idea that there's, equal access for all, right? It's the same. It's just like a cell phone, right? Like the richest people in the world have the same cell phone that you do, right? They don't have a better phone, and I think the tools in this, for the most part, are like that. But to your point, Patrick, obviously there are specialty tools, and if you can build tools yourself, I'm just curious, and I think this applies again. You guys are both in kind of different aspects of AEC. Well, probably a better way to say that. But I'm curious, like, what do you see as kind of from a standpoint of experimentation? How is and making tools. I don't know, Eric, if you're making any tools or if you're just really using the tools, but is this a thing of like you have to get in there and experiment and learn what these tools are capable of, or and how much time can you actually spend doing that, or should you be doing that so that you are at least understanding what the landscape is out there? Eric, why don't you take that?
Oh, what's that to be? Oh,
It was at both. It'll be eventually at both of you. So
all
yeah, I
right.
mean, from your standpoint, and especially when it comes to teaching and writing, like how are you? What's your stance on that, and how are you approaching this?
How am I approaching?
Like tool usage, experimentation.
Mhm.
How are you taking that, and even tool building? Like, are you
Yeah.
doing anything on your end to enhance your capabilities so that, like, again, like as these more specialized tools do emerge, that you're ready to actually put them to use?
Yeah. No, I mean, I build tools all the time. I mean, I don't design buildings anymore, and it's not part of my professional life. So,
Hmm.
I'm not in that space. But, I develop specific single use software for all sorts of things that I need to be doing. And I think, you know, I always begin with the question of, okay, what is the start and what is the finish? What am I actually trying to accomplish? And then what is the best approach to doing this? Is it some off the shelf application? Is it, some app done by some startup that I sign up for free and then, 2 weeks later it's charging my credit card every month and I forgot about it and that sort of thing? Or is it actually a bespoke solution? I mean, is it straightforward enough that I can just jump into ChatGPT or Claude and, code it outright. So, I mean, I think that, yeah, I just circle back to this idea that this needs to be a period of time where we're very open-minded about what it is that we're trying to do and what is the ultimate start and the ultimate end. Evan, the last time we talked about Uber as a case study. And I think that taxi cabs were a very, very protected market. They were very well entrenched, legally, illegally, culturally. I mean, this is like a very kind of fixed part of civic life, especially in some cities. And, it was disrupted because they failed to realize that nobody gave a shit about taxis. People just wanted to get from one place to another without using public transportation or their own vehicle. And technologists were able to step in there and say, if we take point A and point B, like how does technology solve that problem de novo? So, if I was at an architecture firm, like I would be asking that about every process, the smaller ones and the larger ones.
Hmm. Yeah.
No, for certain. And like, I think when I look at it like this, if you're a leader of a firm and you're not willing to like try out these tools and find the boundaries yourself, you're never going to know what you can and can't ask someone to do. I think that's like the way I think about it,
Hmm.
especially with AI. You just have to try because the boundary between what the human can do, what the AI can do is not a hard line. It's a very squiggly lines. If we kind of look at like some things, you'll be like, oh my God, I can't believe I can just press a button and get X. And other things you'll be like, I should be able to do it, but it's far outside the capabilities. And so you have to constantly test that boundary. But then the boundary is always changing. So as you can add more new models, new ability to understand what you're doing, you have to kind of keep picking away at like, here's a problem I've been trying to solve for the last 6 iterations of the AI model. Can it do it now? And you try and you're like, oh my God, can do it now. Then that's
Yes.
like, you got to
Right.
keep experimenting because then I can't go to my software team and say like, do it this way because I read this on a blog somewhere like that. That's not the right way to lead as a leader. You have to,
Hmm.
if you want to lead on technology, you have to try it yourself and you have to learn how to do it yourself. And then if you're it's like there's this guy that he was my best boss I've ever had. I was unloading trucks one summer in college and he didn't come back there and say, you guys are going too slow. He would say like, you guys are going too slow. Let me show you the speed that I want you all to work at. And he would go in there and he'd start throwing stuff off that truck. He was a reasonably, older guy and he was out doing us young kids, like just moving these boxes, and I remember like thinking like that. And he'd work that way for like 15, 20 minutes. He'd be like, now keep doing that for the next 4 hours. I'm going to come back here. I want to see this truck unload. And I think like that's the kind of like person that you really want to work for them because you're like, I don't want to let somebody like that down because they're doing the work
Mm.
as well. And I think those kinds of
Hmm.
leaders that are more your servant leader type, I guess, is what they say, or something like that. You got to like show it first, and then other people will believe you, especially when it comes to AI.
Were you paid by
So
the
when
box or by the hour?
Paid by the hour, so
more boxes in less time. Yeah. I mean, this is architecture too, right? It's like do it in less time. It's like well, better design in less time. It's a tall order. And so I'm curious from like a tool stack standpoint, Patrick, can you give us some ideas about
Hmm.
what you guys have taken on versus what build versus buy? Is there any buying? Are you doing it all? Like give us just kind of a glimpse into what's going on at Cove.
yeah, I mean, we've taken a philosophy that you probably can't find something that does what you need. And really nowadays with AI, you can copy any software. There's no barrier now to making software for real. You can literally just take a screenshot of something and you can make it in a few days. So
Hmm.
in that world, then um, it's kind of more incumbent upon the company, I think, to look at what is it that we should make, start from
Hmm.
there, build against that. So we use a lot of React, Tailwind. That's kind of like the kind of like front end. And then on the back end, we use a lot of Python. We use a lot of things like that. And we use AWS, obviously, for like servers or, some people use Azure and, whatever your tech stack happens to be. But I think like a lot of architects are obviously not going to be like, okay, well, how does web development work? But we feel like web tools are like the best because they allow us to connect more things together than building like a
Hmm.
desktop app or something like that.
Sure. Yeah. I'm curious from your point of view then when it comes to the words that you just said, React, Tailwind, AWS. I mean, those are foreign words and acronyms to a lot of architects, right? Especially, traditionally trained architects. So, like, what do architects need to be doing about that? Are they hiring a staff? Are they outsourcing this to a consultant or outsourcing it to, anywhere? I mean, that's a question I think a lot of people would have. Well, where do I start?
Yeah. I mean, I think like if you look at some of the tools that are out there, if you kind of start following the AI hashtag on like, honestly, on X, I know that's not a
Hmm.
platform that for political reasons some people like to be on, but like it is where the discussion's happening. AI. If you want to see what's going on in real time as a new model comes out, people start testing that thing. They use different tools to
Hmm.
say, I tried this tool
Yeah.
and it's totally awesome, or this one sucks. And you can see that and then you can go try it yourself. That's where you want to be. On LinkedIn, you're going to see stuff that's maybe 3, 4 weeks behind, and in some cases even months old, and so it can be a little stale.
An eternity.
Yeah, and like, and you can also just see that like people who don't know what they're talking about, there's a lot of those people on LinkedIn. Whereas on X, like you get
Hmm.
exposed pretty quick if you don't know what you're talking about. So you kind of start to you see a real learning culture of sharing stuff on X. So I would
Interesting.
say like if you want to see what's happening and what tools are the right ones for when you're watching this podcast, like make sure you know what's the latest at that time. Because then there's some things I've tried last year that I was like, this is game changing. Now I look at it, I'm like, that's not really a thing now.
Interesting. Yeah, it's moving so quickly. So, yeah, the way that I would explain it is like X, it's unfolding in real time. It kind of it's always been that real time
Yeah.
timeline, the feed of what's happening now. And LinkedIn is like the polished version. Like I would like to now present to you the final results of the thing, right? And it's way more like I mean, obviously they're bigger posts. It's a different audience. I mean, it's like I'm going to show you my accomplishments and now you will applaud for those accomplishments, right? Versus this kind of just exposing the work in real time version. So I think that's a really insightful thing to say, even if it isn't the place that people want to be hanging out. There's some incredible information shared and like you get to actually look under the hood and see what's going on quote behind the scenes from yeah.
I would
Eric, any ideas or like thoughts that brings up for you?
I would agree 100%. I mean, I think Twitter is where those conversations happen. It's where I get a lot of my news. And I think you both characterized it correctly. Like some model comes out and 3 hours later, some guy is like, hey, here's what I did with the model. Like, here's like the use case, and you can explore through that. I mean, personally, in terms of my explorations and keeping up to the news and stuff, I would also throw YouTube in there. I think you need to filter it a little bit, but there's a lot of the same effects, only slower than Twitter, faster than LinkedIn, and
Because
the
it takes
same.
more to actually create a
Yeah,
YouTube video versus just throw something
but
next.
similar phenomena. You get somebody that takes something new and makes some incredible experiment with it, and then 12 hours later is giving away the step-by-step how-to for free because they want to click views or whatever. Um, just because of my situation, I favor a lot of academic papers as well. And I know a lot of people don't have access to those kinds of journals if you're not affiliated with an institution, but I really like to be aware of what's going on in the lab, and what pure researchers are doing, because they know that no one is ever going to read their paper, you know? So they just kind of put it out there and they're like, hey, here's what I did. Give me more
Here's a
funding.
thread. Yep,
Yeah,
here's a thread.
exactly. Um, but no, you find a lot of interesting stuff that slips under the radar there, because I think a lot of times, academics are so down in the weeds, with their work, that they don't particularly understand the professional applications of it. They're not looking towards that necessarily. So if you know a little bit of something about practice and how buildings get made, and you can suffer through an academic paper, you can often draw a lot of connections about what's coming.
Patrick, I have a question about kind of hosting your own models versus just using publicly available models. There's a lot of models out there. Are you guys doing any privately hosted, like you're taking their model, putting it in onto your hardware and running it locally? I'm curious because a lot of firms have constraints around that with the types of projects that they're doing, not only with what information can go outside of the network, right? But also just like I think this is also part of that trust thing too, and,
Yeah.
and control thing. So, where do you guys stand on that, or is it a little bit of everything?
Yeah, so like we do have to abide by FedRAMP style stuff, in terms of like what hosting it yourself is probably one of the least secure things you could do. To be honest,
Mm,
like AWS, if you're in their one of their super lockdown data centers, your data is a lot more secure in terms of if you're making tools. So like in some cases, like web-based tools can be more secure than a local application. But when it comes to like sharing your model or something with the model, like I don't know, you there's OpenAI is probably the one that's taken or Claude, to be honest, or from Anthropic. Those two are focused on winning government contracts, and so they have
hmm
created versions that are more secure than others. I think the biggest risk you could do is like try to use like DeepSeek or one of those open source models that you don't know who created it and try to run it locally. That would be like, to me, the most risky thing you could do, because you really just don't know
mm.
what biases went into it. I think I'll oftentimes think it too is like, this is a continuum. And if you design your code where you can swap out the engine, which is how we design everything, we'll swap out our model every time there's a new model. We could switch from, one model to another without any problem, So I think like you just have to design your system such that the brain can be popped out and a new one can be put in fairly easily. Because, things are, by the time you start building something to the time you finish building something, even if it's a few weeks, it'll already be out of date. So might as well just kind of like not focus so much on like I don't know. I just focus on making sure that it's something that's backed by an entity that's trying to win contracts with the federal government.
Yeah.
That would be my advice if from a security standpoint.
Okay. Well, final question. I'm going to turn the tables for you both, and you're putting you on the spot. And so, do you guys have any questions for each other? I know that
Oh, so
to me,
many.
like maybe this podcast sparks something there. But Eric, do you want to jump? I mean, I would love to pass it over to you and just say like, what do we need to get into the end of this episode before we sign off?
Um, I really do have a million questions, Patrick. I hope we talk again soon. But I guess if I had to pick one, you mentioned something earlier about larger firms disseminating technology, or maybe even yourselves passing that along. How do you see that landscape unfolding? Because there is there's really kind of an unfair situation. I don't know if it's unfair in some sort of moral philosophical sense, but you know what I mean. You have large firms with staff that can dive into this AI stuff, and then you have a whole bunch of very, very small or one-person firms that maybe don't have the resources or the expertise. And I've just been struggling to understand how that plays out. Do we end up with like 10 architecture firms in the future because they kind of captured everything during this AI wave? Or is there some technology transmission whereby, large firm pioneers something, and similar to the way the OpenAI and some of these other companies have been working, like we'll give you the model that's like 3 months old for free and like you pay for the new one. How do you see all that playing out?
Yeah. So I guess I look at it this way, like in private equity where you roll up firms and combine them together, they kind of are shooting for a 10% of the market to create a major player. So like when you think about that, I think will happen, like someone will come along and start rolling up small firms to create a new large mega firm. I think that'll happen. When I look at, I've worked in large firms, the multi-office firms that are out there will struggle because it'll be hard to enforce a top-down like AI adoption strategy. Individually within those firms will be brilliant people. There'll be certain offices that may be more or less using AI, but like I think being a large firm right now is a disadvantage. It's kind of the dinosaurs versus the mammals situation here. I think if you're a smaller firm, you can enforce a more aggressive technology approach. And if you're a principal, you can if you're the one who learns it first and then enforces it, you can kind of say look, you either can work here and do this, or you can go work somewhere else. But I know I can, build a firm that's going to do its thing. I think that's what you'll see first, is that the smaller firms may actually take it on faster, and then maybe not like 5-person firms, but like a 30-person firm is a good example. That size is probably more nimble, and more than likely the principals can get aligned around a particular spend or investment approach. So I do see that probably happening. And then I think you'll start to see that as the smaller firms that have adopted AI grow a little bit larger, we'll see right now there's a hollowing out of the small to big. It's too big on the top, too small on the bottom. So I think we'll see more of a graduated range. There'll be the boutique firms who are never going to use AI, and you come to me because you want your building hand drawn. I think that will still exist. But then there'll be the firms that are like, AI, you don't want to use AI for your project, where the old school people come to us because we're, the expensive Louis Vuitton handbag kind of thing. That'll still happen too. So, but I think there'll be a continuum of people in the middle though, who are all using technology to deliver a unique level of design service that far exceeds either the large boutique firm on the outside or the tiny, firm that works for the homeowner. There'll be like those guys in the middle. That group will become probably 50% of the market, is my guess. In the next 5 to 6 years, you'll probably maybe 10, if we want to be conservative, but at least by 2030, you'll start to see some firms that are like in that middle ground, probably occupying more and more of the buildings that affect the maximum number of people.
Interesting.
Patrick, your turn. What do you got? You got a question?
I guess I'm just thinking I need to hire a lot of people. So as I'm thinking about new folks coming out, I've been engaging a lot with Casey Castor, over there at SciArc, and some of his students. I've hired them, and they're really kind of well fitted to this problem. They're kind of, they use AI, they have experience doing some random project where they may or may not have had success in creating a building, but certainly something really interesting is the idea that's being explored. And I just wonder, as you look across the educational landscape of what we need to do to kind of help folks get ready, what are you seeing that's been the most successful at teaching? Because I'm actually teaching a lot of people who are hiring in-house to do these things. Yeah. And it's
sure,
what are you finding is a more successful way to help kids overcome the whole AI can just make anything, but what does that mean? The meaning of it, the true soul of what you're making. I don't know Is there anything you found that's successful with it?
No. You gotta give me the hardest question. No, I mean it's super challenging, right? Because I mean I'm old fashioned enough to believe that you really can't be a good architect unless you build, like unless you like been on the job site and you swung hammers and like that that touch and feel of materials, that execution of the process gives you the intelligence to intelligence broadly speaking, to actually like design things in the right way. And I think not to cast aspersions on architects who don't build, they have a role as well. But I think that um, we need to stay connected to that in some way. And I worry a lot for education, and we've already seen this effect show up in other professions like medicine, where the AI is not good enough to do what the senior person does, but they're good enough to do what the junior person does. So that junior person can't get into the job market and start making those early mistakes and gaining that experience. So I think that's a broad systemic problem, and I would address it by zooming even farther out and perhaps being more useless. I think AI is going to fundamentally change what we hire for. And, working in disaster zones, it's funny, I would hire a lot of architects and I was always prioritizing certain things: adaptability, resilience, um, humility, people who could be humble in front of a problem that they didn't necessarily understand. And, when I survey the architecture job boards, we're still hiring in the same old way. We're like, I want somebody who knows this software and is working on this kind of project and this sort of thing. And I think those considerations are just getting less and less meaningful by the day. So, in terms of training people, I always found that if you hire that person based on, I hate to say it, but the non-architectural qualities, the things you can't teach, courage, resilience, adaptability, personability, that sort of thing, then they can teach themselves at some level, right? And they can adapt to whatever's coming, and they can learn from the twists and turns that, the world is bringing towards them. So, I mean, I think that as educators, we have to be cognizant of that shift as well, and talk to ourselves about the skills in the future. Like, they're not going to be like this software or how to do like this calculation or something like that. I think there are certain things that are going to be in demand as we fully realize an AI future, and we have to teach to those, and you have to hire to those. So,
Yeah,
you know,
man, I just seem like when I'm looking at folks that are successful, it's the problem solvers who are really the ability
mm,
to think your way out of a paper bag. Sometimes
yeah,
is like what I've seen as the quality that I'm always looking for. But I've really seen that, like, there's an uneven ability of people to reason their way out of a problem. When,
and
you know, s- uh,
yeah. No, and I think it's challenging in architecture because I think design training has a way of marrying you to process. We kind of go through school in those early parts of our career and we develop methods that work. I design with a micron pen on yellow bumwad, and that's just like how I do things. And architecture rewards that kind of monogamy because like you can produce great results consistently. But you know, paper bag or no, like being able to say, this is what the problem is. So this is what my reaction should be. And if that doesn't fit with the method or skills that I have, got to get new skills, develop new methods. I think that's what we're looking for.
yeah,
Change management. I mean,
Mm,
it's so difficult. I mean, you talk about just kind of like this you get used to the way that these tools work. That you get rewarded for that, and that just this reinforcement learning. I mean, it's
yep.
hard to escape those loops, and especially, I mean, it takes 30 years to get into a position of, you know, stability in this industry. And then what, right? And then it's like cruise control turns on, and like don't mess with this system, right? There's a ton of that going on too. And I think the one of the biggest things that I keep seeing is there's kind of this cheerleading by certain individuals in this industry that are like, use AI, and it's just so generic, right? It's like architecture has to transition to, it's like super generic. It's like, well, what is that? And I think it's just that on some level, it's like the message has to be that simple. And at the same time, it's so overwhelming because tool fatigue and headlines constantly changing. And even we're saying it today, it's like, well, it didn't do it 3 weeks ago, but now it does, right? And it's like, how do you keep up with that? And so a lot of that is just all of these things are putting pressure on people, and at the same time it's like, well, like the project deadlines are looming, right? We got to, and so we're going to do it the way that we've done it because we know it works. So tough situation. It's a tough situation to be in, for sure. Well, thank you guys for taking the time to have this conversation. Thank you both for asking the best questions at the end. That was amazing. And we'll have links to both of Eric and Patrick in the show notes for this episode so that you can connect with them and read Eric's writing and see the latest on the AI first firm that Patrick is championing at Cove. And this has been fantastic. Thank you both so much for your time today.
Thanks to you both.
Yeah, thank you.
Thanks to our sponsors, and thanks to our members this week. Find out how you can become a member at trxl.co. And I'll talk to you again next week.